This week, we are discussing aerial landscape photography with Cameron Wilcox. You are listening to the LAKESCAPE Photography Podcast. Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 19 of the LAKESCAPE Photography Podcast. I am your host, Nicholas Albert, and this week we are joined by Cameron Wilcox, an aerial photographer based out of Marquette, Michigan. Cameron's work spans many disciplines, but he embraces aerial photography in the unique angles, perspectives, and stories that can be told from the sky. In this episode, Cameron shares his advice for those looking to get into aerial photography, as well as some experiences, recommendations, and safety precautions for everyone actively operating a drone or looking into it. As always, links to all of Cameron's work are included in the show notes below. Head over to his page and give him a follow as you enjoy this week's discussion with Cameron Wilcox.
Hey, Cameron Wilcox here, coming to you from Marquette, Michigan, way up north in the almost top of the UP, biggest town in the UP. Happy to be on the show. Nice to finally meet you here and be able to get together and talk a little bit about what I really like to do, be out there shooting.
It's great to have you on the show here, and I've been following your work. It's always really cool to see what you're getting up there in Marquette with just everything. You really kind of have a little bit of everything in your portfolio, from aerial photography, astrophotography, call them ground landscapes with, the ground or land camera. What's your background in photography? How'd you get started?
It's always just been kind of a hobby thing for me. And I mean, going back to being a kid, I grew up in the 80s. I had a disc camera. I don't know if you're familiar with that relic at all, but I had one of those. I'd bring on family vacations. Um, I used to really like taking like nature photos and things when we were on trips. So that was kind of how I started out with things. And then I stopped for a while, except for just kind of, snapshot, candid kind of stuff. I actually did quite a bit of kind of my hobby was painting. So I did acrylics and watercolor painting. Um, did a lot of just outdoor kind of landscape kind of stuff. Great Lake stuff, just kind of being in this area. And it was fine. I kind of enjoyed doing it, but I sort of realized that the stuff I was trying to paint, I could maybe get with a camera better. So I went and picked up a Sony, and I went out and started kind of taking the pictures of things that I like to paint, and just found I liked doing that better. I found that more rewarding than the painting was, and so kind of started into that, and kind of got into it, and gradually sort of worked up my understanding and worked my way into slightly more complicated gear. Um, I've also, on top of that, always just really liked like flying and just sort of how things look from an airplane window. I'm always going for the window seat on a plane. I just like to look down and see all that stuff down there, see what's going on, just the way everything changes when you see it from that perspective. So when drones started to kind of become a thing, and I discovered I could get one that was, relatively cheap and did not require a lot of extra baggage to be able to take out, I kind of jumped at the opportunity to do that and started with the drone photography. So I kind of do, I'd say probably 75% drone photography now, and then 25% just kind of landscape, on the ground photography, but just kind of whatever catches my eye. I mean, it's all stuff that I like to do for fun. It's my own personal stuff that I do. So I, like to whatever seems to catch my interest.
Yeah, very cool. And I really like how, you have that extensive art background with, painting and then moving into photography, that's actually something that I myself did as well. I loved painting. I painted with oil paints, acrylics, all kinds of different stuff. And then I figured out in college, actually, they had a way to basically transfer a black and white image onto a canvas and then you could paint it. And like it was a picture that you took, and then you would put it onto canvas and then you could, paint it with whatever colors you
I
wanted to
think I've
use.
seen that before, like a gel medium or something like that, that
Yep.
would transfers it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. A transfer. And then, you can kind of paint it how you like. And I kind of went the same route too. I was like, hey, this is fun, but I kind of want to just take the image on the camera. It's a lot less time consuming.
Yeah, don't go through all the extra steps. I still do a little bit here and there, but it definitely shifted over to photography, and it, I guess, kind of scratches that same itch of wanting to do something creative.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, with the aerial stuff, that's becoming really popular. And, I myself have owned a few different drones over the last 5, 6 years now. Um, the most recent one, Mavic 3 Pro that I just purchased in September of last year. And to your point, aerial photography, it really is a lot of fun. And, you had mentioned that you enjoy airplanes and seeing things from those perspectives. It's funny because as you were saying that, I was like, I hate airplanes, but once it's flying, I love looking out the window and I'm like, okay, we're in the air. We're safe now. This is mostly good.
Yeah, I
And
had the same feeling on my end. I feel the exact same way about it.
yeah, it's like, when it has to take off or land, I'm sitting there like, clutching this armrests, but as soon as we're in the air, I'm like, "Oh, this is great."
Yeah, so like a super cloudy day, or like when you're flying through the clouds, and I mean, I don't fly that often, but a bit here and there. Those days are just always like, oh, I want one where I can actually see what's on the ground and try to figure out where I am based on what you're looking at.
Yeah, exactly. And in the flights that I've taken, I've always loved doing that. And you know, just especially when you go over the top of one of the lakes, like I've flown over Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, Lake Huron. And when you look down through that plane window, you see just how big these lakes really are. And like you look around and you could easily say, hey, we're over the ocean.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
it really puts into perspective how huge these lakes really are. And it's really cool.
Yeah, people just don't really understand that unless they've actually like stood on the shore somewhere. You don't realize what that size is. I mean, people hear lake. I don't know. You see it on the map and just don't really think about it. But when you're actually there and you realize, like, oh yeah, this isn't just something that you could just swim across.
Right.
It's
Yeah. They're
actually just massive.
yeah, exactly. It's like 200 miles across or something like that. So it's big. It's certainly big.
Yeah, absolutely.
And with drones now, you can get those cool aerial perspectives and you can really approach photography in a totally different way. And that's something that drew me to buying one and getting into aerial photography because it it never seems to fail that in my experience you'll see something really cool on the ground. You'll get to a point, you'll hike to it, you'll do whatever. And yeah, sometimes shooting it from the ground is perfectly fine. Great. You can still compose a powerful shot. But then there's those instances where, you kind of wish you could be like 10 feet in the air or maybe, give or take just to change the perspective, but still stay in that three-dimensional space. It's incredible how much that can change a scene.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it really makes a big difference. I mean, you hear people talk about just with regular landscape photography, like the importance of either like getting to a higher perspective or getting to a lower perspective. So you're not just always shooting at that like eye level, because then that gives you something interesting, and then the drone gives you, that much more um, kind of height to look at things and play around with that perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really what photography is really all about, is just playing with perspectives and, you know, finding interesting ways to visually represent something that moves us, whether it's a waterfall or a rugged shoreline, or I've even seen images where it's literally just sky and the lake. And from the right perspective, from the right height, it looks absolutely incredible. And, drones open that door for us. But, before we get too far into like the whole artistic side, let's kind of kick it off with the essentials here that, are good for listeners to know about. You know, what do you feel that new drone users need to know before they ever even take off?
Um, I think the big thing is to kind of um, plan and practice to start with before you really get out there and try to take photos with a drone. I think sort of learning the drone and how it works and how to run your controls is very important. Um, and also doing that in a pretty open area. Um, I did my initial stuff with a drone. There's a ball field that's close by the house, and I went over there. So I had this kind of big open space, and you can sort of see what your drone does. Um, there are a number of different rules and regulations, and it's actually much different than what you might expect. Like you can't necessarily just go and put your drone up wherever you want. There's a lot of places uh, that have regulations that you're not allowed to fly. Although the regulations are just controlled by the FAA. The FAA controls anything in the skies over the country. Um, but there are regulations. There are places you can't fly. I mean, most well known is like national parks or national lake shores. So like Pictured Rocks National Park, lakeshore up here, you can't fly over. But there's also some national forest areas and things, and UP has a couple places that are like that. There's a few different things you need to do in order to be able to fly the drone as well. So like a kind of basic test you need to take. I fly with a small drone that's under 256 grams, and so that drone that size and below doesn't need to have FAA authorization. But if you get above that, then you need to have some further testing and things, which I've never done. But I'm assuming with your Mavic that you probably have gone through that course to be able to do that.
Yeah, so I have a Part 107 license from the FAA that I found the coursework beneficial. I took my classes through the Pilot Institute online, and I mean I found it really beneficial. Um, going through the coursework, and it wasn't too intense as long as you pay attention and follow along. It's pretty straightforward. Um, but you do learn a lot of really cool stuff about how to fly, the regulations. And that's something that, I would encourage all of the listeners out there. If you have a drone or if you're considering getting a drone, make sure that you are flying within FAA regulations, like Cameron mentioned. You know, check your airspace. If you're nearby an airport, then you definitely need to be checking airspace. Um, and just making sure that you're flying responsibly. Don't fly over people. Stay away from animals and all that kind of stuff.
Nick, I use an app called Autopilot that just kind of shows places that are restricted. Um, you can actually like even like around airports, so around the Marquette Airport, there's like a zone where you can't fly, but there's also a zone where you can only fly to a certain height, kind of a little further out from the airport. So it'll show that, and the app actually lets you ask for in some of those spaces where you can fly, but only to a certain height, you have to get authorization. So the app will actually ask for authorization for you, so you can do that. So um, it's very unlikely that you're going to run into any trouble, but I think it's just best. I think the reason these things exist is so that if you do, you're kind of ready for it, and you've done the right things. You're taking care of things. You're showing that you're doing what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, exactly. And getting that airspace approval, I actually use the same app, the autopilot app. And there's another one that I actually just found not too long ago. It's called Sky Charts. And what it does is it shows the vector maps that show you different airspaces. It shows you, kind of gives you an idea of what to expect in the area that you're in, to avoid going off on a tangent. Basically, before you fly or purchase a drone, just make sure you're familiar with all these things, and at least watch a few YouTube videos.
Yeah, and there's lots of that stuff out there. I mean, you could watch probably months of content teaching you how to use a drone. There's just so much stuff out there about it. So find somebody you like and watch them. I lost a number of drones in my droning short amount of time. So um, they are relatively easy to either crash into things or dunk into the lake or have other things happen too. So um, it's good to be cautious.
Yeah, my very first one, I crashed into a tree. My second one, I was flying in sport mode, and my dog started chasing it. I was probably about 8 feet off the ground. My dog starts chasing it, so I'm looking at him as I'm trying to like climb with the drone, and I tried to turn it and then crashed right into a bush, and that was the end of that one. And I was just like, okay, well, I gotta slow down on this. I keep crashing these things, but yeah, I mean, they're fun, but they come with a piece of being responsible too. And to your point, different states have different regulations. Like in Minnesota, for example, you cannot fly at state parks at all without permission from the state. I've seen a lot of people try to fly at like Split Rock Lighthouse. You cannot do that without permission from the state. And Minnesota actually has couple drone specific laws as well, pertaining to like insurance and
It's
registration.
definitely
And
something on social media that people will call you out about if you fly somewhere that you're not supposed to. Like you don't say, "Oh, I had permission from so and so or something to do this." I mean, people will definitely let you know if you were in a spot you were not supposed to be flying. They will get pretty vocal about it. So
yep, yeah, people will jump into your comments or send you messages. And I've heard that some people have actually been reported to the FAA for multiple violations. And it's one of those things where just don't take the chance. I've heard horror stories of, you know, people getting multiple, fines in the multiple thousands of dollars for.
yeah, it can get quite expensive if you don't know what you're don't know what you're doing and get in the wrong place. So
Yeah, exactly.
and you probably think you're fine until you crash your drone into the ranger station at the state park, and then all of a sudden things have gone downhill really quickly, and you've got something to explain. Um, I lost a drone in a river once, and actually, a person found it, and then they contacted DJI, who um, actually put them in touch with me. So because they had the serial number, so because you register a bunch of stuff through the app. So they put them in touch with me, and actually, the person sent the drone back to me then. So I got this river mud covered drone that a person had gotten back to me. But I guess the point of that is that people can tell, like it's easy to find out who the drone belongs to. So uh, you can't just trash it and walk away and hope nobody notices if you cause any damage.
Right, right. They're traceable. They're certainly traceable. And the big thing is just, fly safe, fly legal, respect the environment and the community, and just be aware of what you're doing. And, then you can enjoy the art piece that we briefly touched on earlier. We'll get a little bit more into it here where, you know, like we were saying, you can really do some really exciting stuff, new perspectives, um, just getting into places that are otherwise, I mean, inaccessible without a helicopter or an actual airplane. Um, you know, what what are some of your favorite images that you've shot using a drone?
I think it's in part the drone stuff is there's like curiosity about what you might find. And you were talking about kind of that perspective from the land and you're looking at stuff and you like see something that looks cool and you're like, oh, I'm gonna go check that out and see how I can frame that up and see how that will look the best. But I think with the drone, you look at places and you're like, oh, I wonder what's over there. That looks like it might be a cool structure, a cool something. Um, One thing that I've discovered as I've kind of done this for a while is that swamps tend to be very interesting locations. Um, as far as like abstract photography goes, just some really unique kind of crazy things you can find getting out over these places that there's like no way you could actually walk to. Um, but they, just kind of present these really unusual shapes and kind of images that you can find. It's actually one of my favorite drone shots that I've gotten was actually a swamp that I just wasn't. It was totally, oh, this just looks like a interesting area. I'll just put the drone up here and just see what's out there. And it was in the fall, and the swamp was just all these different colors. It's like the entire rainbow was like in this little area around this lake, and just this really cool abstract image from the air that you just wouldn't. Kind of looking out at it, it looked like just this flat, empty space, and you would have no idea until you got up above it what was actually going on down there. So it's kind of interesting discovery, and I think that's a big part of it is that discovery of what you might find when you get up there. You think something looks interesting, and then you get there and you're like, oh yeah, that is actually really cool. Sometimes the inverse as well, like you see something like, oh, that looks really cool, and then you get close to it and you're like, oh, actually no, that does not look as cool from the air as I thought it might. I've seen that a few times. Like you'll see like this great big cliff, and you're like, "Oh, I bet it'd be fun to kind of fly up against the edge of that cliff and see what that's like." But I always feel like those, when you do that, they feel like they're like 5 feet tall, and like this drone just kind of zips up them, and it's nothing. So uh, that's kind of the opposite of the the interesting drone find. That's kind of boring, actually.
It's really cool how, like you mentioned, like with the swamp, you look at it from the ground and it's like, well, okay, yeah, it's a swamp. Like, what, what am I going to shoot here? But then once you get the drone up in the air, you look down. Well, now you have this incredible top down perspective, and it can really change the dynamics of otherwise kind of bland. I wouldn't say bland, but maybe not as visually appealing places from the ground, photogenic, not they're not as
Yeah, absolutely.
photogenic.
Just a much more unique way of looking at things, and you just see things in a very different way. Um, you also have that ability too. I mean, you can just like, especially for if you're looking at something more abstract, you can just kind of shoot at whatever sort of angle you want, or kind of you really have a lot of freedom of movement. So, and you like zooming in with the drone, moving close, moving back out, um, being able to kind of spin it around, um, that kind of stuff. I mean, you can really sort of you have a lot of freedom as far as your composition goes.
That's something that I think is really exciting and really rewarding because I've had the same experience where, I'll fly the drone up. Now, I like to try to shoot waterfalls from a little bit higher, just get a different perspective. I'm always the guy that's either literally like in the middle of the water with my actual land camera and shooting up at this waterfall, or I'm in the air with the drone looking back down on it. Again, to get out of that eye level perspective and just mix it up. But I've had the same experience where you'll fly up to a waterfall or what have you, you look at it and you're like, okay, well, maybe that's not as cool as I thought it was going to be. You fly a little bit higher, you look around, you see something further upriver, or you see something in the distance that you know you can safely fly to. Or other times I've actually just used my drone. I mean, maybe I'm a little lazy for this, but I've used my drone to, fly out somewhere as long as I can, keep line of sight of it and see, hey, what's over here? Because if I can save myself a 45-minute hike with a 20-minute flight, I'm gonna try it.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely good for some photo recon to kind of get out and get around, and again, that curiosity factor where you're like, I wonder what's over there, and you can just go look, and it's fairly quick and fairly painless. If you don't see anything, but you go look somewhere else. But there's always that. I guess I always have that urge, and I get out to a place like, oh, let's go up, let's look and see at least, because you just don't know, what you're going to get until you actually get up and look around. And kind of that in the same way, you find stuff that you're like, oh, I wasn't expecting that to be cool. I thought I was here to photograph this, but actually that thing over there is much cooler than this is. And you just didn't have any idea from looking at it on the ground that it was going to be such a cool thing to look at.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Now, pertaining to the artistic process when you're shooting aerial images or, you know, looking at things from an aerial perspective and considering, how the dynamic of the process kind of changes in a way, how do you approach composition differently when you're using your drone?
I think it's a little bit more fluid with the drone than it is with kind of with a more, like tripod based photography. Um, and again, with that being able to kind of move the camera around so much, you can really sort of choose what you want to get in. I think for me, I usually have like something that I'm trying to get in the frame. And so I'm trying to work the drone around to get that thing in the frame. Um, so, having, and I do think you can have kind of depending on where you put your drone, you can have kind of a foreground, a midground, and a background that do exist sometimes. But just trying to get to that right perspective where all those things show up. Um, and then for more abstract stuff, for me at least, it's just like what catches my eye, like what looks interesting about this image, like what can I put in this frame that I like. But again, there's usually that one, like, I don't know, there's always seems like there's something that you want to sort of showcase, and then there's other stuff around it that you're kind of, how do I get this in here and make this look the best possible? So, kind of picking out an element or two and then just moving things around and trying to find the best way to make them um, kind of make that interest that you had in them actually show up when you get a final photograph of it.
Yeah, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I mean, when you're trying to fly the drone and simultaneously put together a scene, I've noticed for me, anyways, it it takes me a little bit more time because you kind of have to think outside the box of like my camera is quite literally flying. So as you try to get into that three-dimensional space, you have to be aware of, what obstacles are nearby. Am I by a tree? How close am I to the water? Can I go left? Can I go right without hitting something? Adds a little bit more of that planning piece. But like you said, when you get all those elements together, the foreground, midground, background, and it comes together cohesively, it really does look cool. And you can make some very powerful shots with the right combination of elements.
Yeah, and I think people are drawn to that as well. Like they see those things and they're like, oh yeah, that's like, especially if there's something kind of recognizable at least a little bit that they can kind of see and like, oh, that's a river or something, and then but what's going on around it? Why does it look like that? How does that happen? So um, some things are a little bit unique, but also there's some element in there that you're able to sort of kind of catch hold of and realize is something that you recognize.
Yeah. Yeah. And, one of the things that I really like to do is actually mess with photo and video just to, see how they kind of complement each other, but I always have to remind myself, like, hey, you can do video too. And, it doesn't always have to be a still image. So, when you're,
I often forget about that, but I also find myself to be a very poor videographer. So when I do like get footage, I just don't feel like I'm quite dynamic enough. I watch these, people fly these beautiful panoramas along a mountainside, with a nice road in the foreground. I'm always like, oh, that looks so cool. And then I feel like I go out and do it, and it just, looks like something you let your toddler fumble around with your camera for a little bit, and they took a nice picture of the lake. So I'd like to learn more about it. That's something I should go watch more YouTube videos about, is figuring out how to do a little bit more videography and do some of that with my drone.
yeah, hey, I mean, don't feel bad because I'm not the best videographer myself. And every time I try, I'm like looking at the controller, I'm like, yeah, this looks great. And then I get home and I look at it on the computer and I'm like, this does not look great.
The drone does come with, and actually, I do think they work pretty well. It has those different preset video functions that you can use, and I will throw those on sometimes. And I do like how some of those look, even if it's a little hard sometimes to get all the elements in that you want when you're doing that. But
When you're out there and you're flying around, and we touched on three-dimensional space, how are you using altitude, angle, and depth together in your images to really tell that story of your subjects?
I think it's that, like, when I'm looking at something, and this is something I think I realized more with kind of land-based photography, but that it's always good to just sort of get as many angles of something as you can, and take things from um, different kind of focal lengths. So you're zooming in, you're out. Just try things from a bunch of different perspectives to see what might kind of best convey whatever you're trying to show. So I think moving stuff around. I mean, I often will start out and I'll get up as high as the drone will go and just sort of look around for different elements that are interesting. So say maybe like like just finishing up winter here, like Lake Superior ice. You can find lots of really interesting patterns in the ice, that there's just things that you would not see from the ground. And once you're up there, you realize there's this kind of great big mosaic of ice that exists out there, that you just, it's icy, but you can't quite tell what's going on until you're up in the air. But then from there, almost using that altitude like as a zoom. So you're like, if there's something interesting you find, getting down in nice and close, um, and some of that stuff, even, you could be at eye level, but it's not something you could ever get to if you were just walking out. There's no way to walk out to with a camera. You have to be with a drone. So sometimes I'll just pull in kind of as close as I can. Other times get out as far as possible to get in, kind of that wider perspective and show more of the scene. Uh, so yeah, just kind of moving around and just seeing where things look best, where things catch my eye. Um, Although, kind of, even with that being said, you bring stuff home and take a look at what you've got, and sometimes you're happy with it. Sometimes you're like, oh, that looked much cooler when I was trying to get a photo of it, and just does not hold up the same way I thought it would when I was out taking its picture.
Yeah, I've experienced that too. It, you know, it's no different than when you're shooting on the ground. You sometimes you look at the back of your camera and you think, "Yes, I got the shot. This is great." And then you come home and you look at it on the computer and you're like, no, this isn't as good as I thought it was." And it's the same thing with aerial photography. This past October, I shot a few scenes with my drone and I was like, "Oh yeah, these are winners. This is just awesome. Really cool perspective." I came back home after, my time up there and loaded them up onto the computer, looked at them and I was like, "These I mean, just not as cool as I thought it was going to be." And it's a part of the process. It's how you learn, especially with aerial photography, because it's the same, but in the same respect, it's totally different at the same time. And it has a lot of unique challenges with it.
I think there's an inverse to that as well, where you're kind of like, you're real focused on a subject, taking a bunch of pictures of it, and then you're like, oh, this looks kind of cool over here, and you go, grab a couple shots of something else. Then you get back home and you realize that thing you were trying to focus on you're just not impressed with, but the thing you did a couple throwaway pictures of, you're like, oh, actually that was really cool. Why wasn't I, why didn't I focus more on that? What was I thinking? Like you got a picture, but not quite, I didn't put quite the time into it that I did to the whatever thing was I was kind of drawn to when I was out.
Yeah, I've done that a couple times, and it it always seems to hit me like when I've got like 30% battery and I'm like, that's what I want to take a picture of. And then you feel like you're pressured, like you're against the clock now because you're like, okay, well, I know I can get to 25% before the alarm goes off and 20% before this thing starts trying to fly back to me. So I got to decide what I'm doing and I got to decide quick.
And drone batteries are just a roller coaster of emotion because they put on the screen, they give you your time, like how much time you have left, but that time decreases. Like if you're flying, it goes down much quicker than if you're hovering. So I feel like I go from like I've got 25 minutes to all of a sudden I've got 15, and then I stop the drone and I'm back up to 22, and I move it around again. So you're always sort of like just racing that time element before you're gonna need to come back in and replace the battery.
Yeah. And that's something that, you have to be very cognizant of when you're out there flying because like you said, when you first put the drone battery in, it might say 30 minutes, but then you fly out, it goes down, it increases again, but remember you got to bring it back. So,
Yep, it's deceptive. Yep, you don't want to be too far out when that happens. I always bring three batteries with me. I've got the DJI is a three battery pack, and I always try to bring that out with me, sort of full. If I'm planning ahead, I make sure it's all filled up. I did the other day though. I went out and was going to put the drone up, and I realized I hadn't charged my batteries, so was an aborted attempt at
hey,
flying.
sometimes it's the safest option so you don't lose it out there, but when when you're out there and you're considering flying your drone, are you going to places that you've scouted previously or are you going to places that you may have already checked out with the drone and passing before and just kind of coming back?
So if I'm in the Marquette area, it's probably places that I've checked out before. I've got a couple of favorite spots that I like to go to. If for people that are familiar with the Marquette area, there's a little Presque Isle up north of town that's just a very photogenic spot, whether you're on land or in the sky. I'll go out there. Then Presque Isle also, which is near Marquette. So those places, there's a couple. As you go more interior, there's a couple rivers that I'll go up to. But other places, I will go on Google Maps and just put it on the satellite view, and I will just scan around and look for things that might kind of look interesting. And then I will try to get to those places and see if I can get my drone up. Um, I like to find like really small kind of lakes that are kind of being closed in on, like by sort of swamp stuff that's closing in, but there's still some water in them, kind of, I don't know, things that are maybe 20, 30 feet across, these kind of small little spots. I always think they look fairly cool in drone photos. So I'll go search those out. But I have my Google map just looks like it's just a mess kind of all over the UP for all these places that I found and marked. So just sort of a mass of pins that places I've found. And I discovered that what Google thinks is a road is very often, especially when you're driving the backcountry of the UP, not actually anything that's accessible by anything without four legs. I mean, there's some places that there's just no way you can get into unless you decide to go wander off in the woods by yourself, which I'm never quite brave enough to go do. But
I understand that there's been a few roads that Google has sent me down and I'm just like, where am I? Or you get a mile down the road and all of a sudden you see a big berm in the middle of the road and you're like, well, what now, Google? I guess I'm walking the next 6 miles. Like, thanks.
where do I go?
Yeah.
There's that thing too where it like gets you to a point and then it like puts like a dotted line to wherever you're going. Like it just like from here you're on your own. Good luck. I know you want to go over there, but this is the closest I'm going to get you. Godspeed.
Yep. Yep. Good luck. Make sure you bring water. Good luck out
Don't
there.
blame me.
Yeah, exactly.
I warned
Exactly.
you.
Well, when you're, considering the artistic side of aerial photography and, just photography in general, but really aerial photography, what does drone photography unlock creatively for you that ground-based photography just can't touch it?
I think it's that abstract quality of it that you get these abstract images that you just can't get from other places. I mean, the ground-based stuff, I mean, there are some fairly kind of well-known elements of composition and things that you kind of look for with landscape photography. And I know that there is the movement to kind of, to do some smaller scenes and to do, some more smaller abstract things. But I think with the drone, you really get stuff like that that you can't get anywhere else. I mean, the only way you can get that is aerial. Um, and with that, though, it's interesting because sometimes people will ask, is that like, did you take that? Like, is that a real close up of something or is that a drone photo? So, like, you kind of lose the perspective of it. It just, rather than being a forest or, something else, it is just the photo itself. So you really kind of distill the elements of what you're getting and sort of make them, it's just about kind of what the composition is and how everything kind of fits together in that little frame that you've gotten from your drone. And I think that's just really cool. And that just, that allows, any little, square plot of ground offers the opportunity to find all sorts of different compositions in it in a way that I don't think you can find when you're on the ground and trying to get a handle on something. So
Yeah, that's very well said, and I really can relate to the same of, it just it's different, but different in the right ways, I guess is a way to put it.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, to a point, you've touched on a couple times is some of these places you just can't get to on land. Like, I mean, sure, if you really wanted to, I guess you could try to swim/crawl through a swamp, or, you could take a chance trying to hike out to a dangerous area or what have you. And, you know, kind of taking that risk, if you will, out of it and allowing creativity to kind of fill that void and see things in a different way. It's pretty cool. It's something that can't really be said for any other any other approach to photography.
Yep, and just getting you too, just out of that, so far out of that normal perspective that it's unique. It just looks very different. I mean, even with the kind of proliferation of drones that's out there now, I mean, I still think there's a lot of uniqueness to what you do. I don't think there are certainly some things that have been overdone, and I mean, some of those for good reason because they're interesting composition, interesting things to see. But I still think there's a lot of stuff out there that you can see that's unique and things you can find. Um, couple, I really like to go out in the fall. When the colors are good. I know it's great photography time. A lot of people like that, but I find with the drone it's kind of extra interesting. But a couple of years ago, I found a lake that had like a perfect kind of ring inside of the lake. So it's a small lake, and then it's got like this ring of, I don't know, it's almost like a ring island with trees on it that was kind of had somehow grown up in the middle of this lake, and it was just this really cool thing. I don't think anything you would have ever realized just from the ground. I mean, you had to see it from the air, and when you did, it was just kind of this awesome thing to be able to find. And I really haven't been able to find much else that is like that. So stuff like that is out there and is really interesting, and kind of new discoveries whenever you go up and look around.
That's cool that you've found stuff like that. I've spent time on Google Maps kind of, searching different areas for stuff exactly like that, where you can do like a top down perspective, or, you can kind of get around it. One thing that I've seen done in the past, and I actually haven't pulled off a drone shot like this myself, but is when you pull the drone around something that's like a you know, water feature, if you will, where you have a small island, maybe a boat, what have you, and you silhouette it against the water or the sunrise or what have you. Some of those shots, when they're composed well, are just so powerful. Just they tell a beautiful story.
Yeah, really, really amazing stuff that you can do like that. So lots of stuff you can convey that just it just is unique from that perspective. It's uh, something interesting to look at, and just given how many images we are bombarded with constantly, something interesting to look at is it's a little hard to find sometimes.
Yeah, I mean it really truly is the defining factor, if you will, for a lot of different types of photography or approaches to photography because, like you said earlier, a lot of things have already been done. And even in aerial photography, to your point, yeah, a lot of things have been done, but people will stop and they will look at an image that is taken in a way that is uncommon or is from a perspective that maybe hasn't been done very often, if ever. You know, as we've been having this discussion, actually, the one image that keeps popping into my head is the Marquette Harbor Lighthouse. Beautiful scene. I mean, it's already naturally a beautiful place, but beautiful scene, right light, right conditions. And it's just such a cool image to just sit there and look at because it's not, even if you were in a boat out in the water, that's not the way you'd see it.
Yeah, and that lighthouse it's just so darn photogenic anyway. It's like sometimes I feel like I go photograph that thing way too much, but it's hard to it's hard to pass up.
Yeah, it's a must stop for me every time I'm in Marquette. I stop there. I stop at the Ore Dock. I go to Black Rocks and I go to Presque Isle Park. Um, Sometimes a little further north, but
Well, when you come out sometime, I'll take you out to Little Presque Isle, and you can check that out because that's really once you've been out there, it's hard not to keep going back to that spot.
yeah, I've been to the call it on land portion of Little Presque Isle, but I saw people last summer actually walk across the lake and go actually out onto the island. I didn't know you could do that.
So you can. It is best to do when the water is warm. It's it tends to be on average about waist deep, and unfortunately, a few people have actually drowned going back and forth out there um, because the shore there is just kind of like there's currents that go through there, so it can get fairly intense through it. So I've been out there a few times, but I tend to go out when it's like August or something, so the water is swimmable temp. If you fall in, it's not your usual Lake Superior, potentially deadly if you go under kind of temperatures. So yeah, a lot of people do go out there though. I've actually never don't know if I've ever really gone out there to do photography. I think I usually end up doing it from the land, or throwing the drone up over the top of it and then getting out there that way. But
Yeah,
uh,
I was gonna say, have you ever flown your drone over Little Presque Isle before to kind of get the same perspective we talked about on the lighthouse?
yeah, actually, I have gone out there. It does get a little bit when you get to the far end of it. Sometimes it gets a little bit kind of pushes the limits of my drone's um, kind of distance capacity. But yeah, that can be very cool. Um, Little Presque Isle is funny though because from the air, it's like it's got this weird like I don't know what to call it even like this gooseneck thing that sticks out towards the land. So it's kind of a it can look a little bit wonky from the air if you don't quite get the right perspective with it, because that thing can just kind of stick out of there, and I don't know, it looks a little bit bizarre, but there's some good angles you can get on it. So
That's really cool. I mean, really, the whole Lake Superior shoreline, I feel, is just incredibly photogenic, especially from the air. I've flown in the Keweenaw. Um, I've flown on the western end of the peninsula by the Porkies. Um, I've never flown in Marquette. Now that I actually think about it, I've never flown in that region. Um, but I look forward to some opportunities later this year, and just really all over the place. The UP is a beautiful place for it.
yep,
And
nope. The shoreline's very beautiful. There's lots of interesting stuff. I feel like the Keweenaw may have the most interesting of the Lake Lake Superior shoreline stuff in the UP, but I certainly have not been to all of it at all. So
yeah, It gets pretty rugged up there, when you start getting into the Copper Harbor area.
Yeah, there's some spots up there where you get those rocks, like, in the water, and, I mean, you can just, like you can see how the glaciers kinda pulled over the top of them. It's just these almost like scars in the lake. It's really impressive stuff.
Yeah, I actually just saw a aerial image of that a few days ago. I forget who posted it, but you could see the actual striations underwater from where everything was moving, and it's like, to the point we made earlier, these are things you would never otherwise see from the ground. I mean, maybe you can walk out into the water and look down and be like, "Yes, okay, here they are," but to see their scale, that's incredible.
Yeah, Presque Isle has some of that. There's if you go, off of the kinda north edge of Presque Isle, uh, there are these great big rock formations underwater, and you just wouldn't realize they're there unless you've got that aerial perspective, but it's kind of amazing, huge striations in the rock and just really, really amazing looking stuff, so it's nice to go check out every now and then.
Yeah, yeah, I actually remember seeing a photo that somebody had taken, just outside of, I wanna say it was Black Rocks, but they flew their drone out and looked down into, that kinda bay area right there, and you can see, like, Black Rocks is on the surface, it kinda tapers down underwater, and then all of a sudden, it's just, like, straight down in some areas into, like, this big, clear, call it a bowl in this bay, and it's just
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah, it's really cool stuff.
Yeah, you to see these different geological features and to be able to capture that and share that, that's pretty neat.
Yep, pretty well.
Yeah. When you're out there and, you're considering gear, flight techniques, we've talked a lot about the artistic part of things, moving to, flight techniques and gear. Do you have any must have accessories or tools that help you improve your workflow and safety when you're out there flying?
I pretty much just use the kind of my basic DJI kit. So I have my drone. I There are a couple different remote control options. You can get one that your phone hooks up to, or you can get one that like has a screen kind of built into it. I'm currently using the one that has a screen built in, um, which is nice in some ways, but in other ways, I like the phone better because the built-in screen has to like connect to Bluetooth to really get all of the features that you get from your phone, which can be difficult in the UP because you get places where you just don't have any cell service. So you can kind of lose that. So um, that's something I do bring along. I have a batch of replacement props that I bring along just in case. Those seem to be the most likely thing that you're going to bust when you're out doing something, and also the thing that you can actually fix if something does happen to it. Um, I've like hit them on the way down on a tree branch, or you're landing and you're not. They do come pretty close to the ground. You're landing, so you can potentially like crack them on a rock or something. So it's good to have that stuff available, potentially for backup. Um, like I said, I always bring along 3 batteries, hopefully full. Probably gives me about an hour and 10 minutes of flight time altogether. Um, but I'm always also watching too and making sure I'm not like, if I'm out at sunrise, you don't wanna have like you don't wanna run out of battery like 5 minutes before the sunrise comes, and then you're like coming back in and having to replace your battery and get back up. The drone does take a little bit of time to kind of find satellite signal and things. So you're always, before you put it up, things don't happen kind of right away. Um, the drones do require you to the DJI drones, and I sorry, because I know there's not that many other types, but I can't speak to other ones. But for DJI, they require you to log on onto a wireless network every now and then. And actually, I had this happen a few weeks ago where if you don't log in, you just go to put it up, and the drone says, "Up, we haven't been logged in for a while. You can't fly until you do." So um, if you're out somewhere where you don't have a connection, you got to come back and find a place where you get connection. So I think it's good to fire up the equipment every now and then and just make sure that everything is connected and doing what it's supposed to.
Yeah, that same thing happened to me this past winter when I was in Ontonagon, and I hadn't used my drone since October. I had charged the batteries before I came up. First morning, I was like, perfect, good sunrise, clear skies. I'm going to go fly the drone. I drove out, was somewhere where there was no service, and I went to turn it all on and get it going. And it popped up and said, hey, you haven't, you know, logged in or whatever. You need to log back in. It put a flight restriction on the drone to where it would only let me fly like 20 meters or something. And I was like, well, I guess I'm not really going anywhere with the drone. I might as well use the land camera because this isn't going to work.
And the drone just doesn't care. I mean, it just, like, it's much more persnickety than, your Nikon doesn't just say, sorry, you can't shoot today. The drone is much more crabby and talks back much more than most equipment does.
It does. It has a little attitude of its own, and you gotta appease it to keep it happy. But I definitely agree with what you said as far as gear too, with bringing backup propellers. And you actually have the same remote that I have. I actually went on Amazon and I bought the little thumbsticks, the spare ones, because
Oh, okay. Yep, that's wise.
yeah, I dropped one at Bond Falls this past winter, and silver, tiny little 3/4 inch long
Yep.
thumbstick.
In the snow, it's gone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I spent a solid 15 minutes looking for it, and I found it, but
Found it?
I was like, yeah, I need to get back up. I actually bought little red ones, so if I do drop them,
Oh,
they're
yeah,
easy
it's
to
good.
find.
I've not done that. I should do that. So,
Yeah, little little things you pick up along the way that you know can help you in a pinch.
speaking of winter flying, I do a lot of flying over the ice, and I like to fly over the lake in the winter. Um, your batteries, you can do it. I've had the drone out actually in sub-zero temperatures. Your batteries run out faster, but usually you can still. I haven't had one drop out of the sky or anything because it froze up. Um, but that is something to keep in mind. The other thing is the drone does tell you if the winds are too strong, and it recommends that you come back. I will admit I've defied those warnings a few times. I did have once where I was not listening to the warnings, and the wind just grabbed my drone and just kind of whipped it a few hundred yards extra away from me than I wanted it to be. So I got it back, but it is good to check the weather. If I see that there are winds like over 20 miles an hour, I just won't even bother kind of going out with it because I know it's likely to run into issues. So
Yeah, I've had those same issues in the past myself where you go to fly and it's pretty incredible how much the wind speed changes once you get off the ground. I mean, just 50 feet in the air, you could be an additional 5-10 miles an hour. And if, 100 feet in the air, you could be 20 miles an hour faster than on the ground. And yeah, that'll grab your drone. It'll throw it all around. It'll, spin it out. I mean, for those that don't know, if a drone flips over, the props automatically turn off. So if you're flying, it's called attitude, and it's where like the nose of the drone will kind of dip down and move as it's going through the air, as kind of propelling itself forward. And if the attitude gets too intense, eventually it's just kind of gonna flip on itself. And if it flips over, it's gonna turn itself off and it's gonna fall right out of the sky. So then
that's a drone disaster I've not experienced yet. So I did add that one in my repertoire.
yeah, it can happen. It hasn't happened to me, but when I was flying my Mavic 2 Pro it was 2022 or 2023, I flew it up and I was somewhere by Black River. And that's actually the experience I was thinking of when I was talking about the wind differences. Is at the river level, it was totally fine. But once I got up above the trees, the remote was freaking out. It was flashing attitude, and like it was like basically saying, bring the drone back because it's going to crash. So, I brought it back, I landed it, and I was like, okay, let's not take crazy chances up here. But, to your point, wind, cold, variable conditions, especially in rugged areas like the Upper Peninsula, you're going to experience wind shear off mountains, off of trees, just the same as you would if you were flying around buildings.
And the lake is very temperamental. The lakes are very temperamental, so you just don't quite know. I live in town in Marquette. It can be pretty calm here. You get out to Lake Superior, and all of a sudden, you got a wind coming off the lake, and there's nothing between you and Canada, and all of a sudden, it's much much stronger winds than you might expect.
Yeah. And then, you have to think about, the sea breeze where, depending on that temperature inversion, if it's, warm on the surface, it's going to potentially be pushing your drone out into the over the lake, and you're going to be like, wow, my drone's getting out there really fast today. Well, it's because the wind is with you. When you got to turn that thing around and you got to fly back against that same wind, and that's going to drain your battery. It's going to,
Yeah, that's actually something also that's a good point. That to be aware of that wind direction, because yeah, you'll think like, oh, this is great, my drone, like everything's going super fast today, and then you turn around and you'll like hit a wall. So um, it's good to put it up and like try a couple different directions and just make sure whichever way you're going that you can get back without without too much trouble. Because I've had some, I've raced dying batteries as I tried to come back against some fairly strong wind, and just had my fingers crossed that I was gonna make it before the drone went down.
yep, I've been there myself where, you think, wow, this is going really well. And then all of a sudden you hit that wind or just actually this past October when I was flying in the Porcupine Mountains, I flew off from, I was actually a little ways back from the overlook. I try to get away from people when I am going to take off. So I always try to find a spot that I kind of have to myself, and then I'll fly off, go out somewhere. And I was flying by one of the cliff faces, and I started lowering it down into the valley, and the wind coming up the valley was actually hitting the cliff face and blowing upward. And as soon as I got close to the rocks, probably 10, 15 feet away, the drone just started going wild. It was, fighting to hold its position. When you run into instances like that in bad weather, or even if it's clear out, this can happen. Get out of it right away as quick as you can. Don't don't try to fight it, because the wind is going to take your drone wherever it wants, and if it's strong enough, it's going right into the rocks or the
Yeah,
water or
I
the
mean,
trees.
the drones are not, they're light on purpose, and they can be they can be tossed around. So
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's fun, it's exciting, but it comes with responsibility. So, you know, as we wrap everything up here, what would you say to someone who's just starting to think about aerial photography? Where should they begin? What should they do?
I would kind of look at the different types of drones. I mean, I think the DJI is really kind of the place you have to go. There's a few others out there, but I don't think anything has quite the quality that the DJI does. Um, I would think about, kind of like mini electronic things are these days. You can either get something like you can just get the drone itself, or you can get a bundle of stuff. Um, I think the bundle is definitely the way to go. I mean, you're going to need more batteries. You're going to need the controller. All that stuff is things that you probably should have. So, I mean, it's deceptive. You go in and look like, oh, that drone doesn't look like it costs too much, and then like you add the stuff in, and all of a sudden it starts to get up there a little bit. But I think um, it's really good to have all that stuff, because it's really stuff that it's pretty impossible to fly if you don't have it. So I would do that. And again, I mean, just find a good place to, once you do get a drone, watch some videos about it. Lots of people have starting out with your drone videos out there. Um, Simple YouTube search to find that, and then just get out and go practice with it and try all sorts of different stuff and just get comfortable with it. I know that when you are out flying, and if there is like an incident, kind of like you're talking about, where you need to get your drone out of a place quickly, it's just good to know your controls, because if you don't know what you're doing in kind of, in a moment where you're kind of maybe panicky, if you just know what you're doing, you just, you kind of quickly back it up or get it out. And maybe if you don't know what you're doing, you accidentally press the wrong joystick and, kind of worsen the hazards that you're part of. So it's just good to kind of know your controls, be comfortable with the drone before you're really kind of putting it up in situations that might be a little bit more precarious. Uh, and I'm speaking to here from I know there's a lot of kind of the first person drone stuff that's out there that's a little bit more kind of meant to kind of dodge and weave between things and a little bit more agile. But for just sort of the drones that are meant more just for still photography or for, basic videography, I think, that kind of stuff, you need to be real careful about what you do to keep it. I will say though that, and I think this is very nice. I don't know if you're taking advantage of this, but DJI does have a program. When you first get your drone, before you put it up in the air, you can sign up for it, and it's basically like a replacement warranty. So if you crash it, if it flies away, they will replace it, for a very reduced cost from what you'd have to do to buy a new one. And when I've done that, basically, you send them your log showing what happened. So for me, for example, it crashed into Lake Superior. They say okay, and they just send you a new drone. So um, there's not a lot of stuff you have to go through to do that. But I would highly recommend that, because the likelihood, if you're out flying, that something's going to happen to your drone is actually pretty decent. I think between the two of us, it sounds like we've lost a handful of drones already. So um, I've only really been at this for 3 or 4 years too. So I probably I'm better about it now. It's been a while since I lost one, but it was almost like a drone a year that I was losing. So uh, it's good to have backup.
Yeah, exactly. And I 100% agree with everything. Get out, practice flying it, learn your controls, learn the regulations in your area and the rules.
Yep, absolutely. And drones can be something that is annoying to other people, and so I tend to be like, I'm a sunrise photographer, so I'm often out when there's just not a lot of people around. But just, be aware that people might not be so thrilled to have your drone out flying over their heads. So, if you're with a big group of people and it seems to be annoying people, go fly somewhere else where you're not not ruining somebody else's experience.
Yes, I completely agree that with all of that. Don't be buzzing people, don't be hovering over people. And, if you see a large group of people, just fly somewhere else. Like I said earlier, even when I'm taking off, I'll try to find somewhere that is literally around nobody. And like last October, I wanted to fly at the Overlook at sunset. There was people everywhere. So I actually drove up the street to Cloud Peak, and I hiked all the way up Cloud Peak, got up there. I was the only one there, and I was like, okay, this is perfect. I'm here by myself. I could fly this thing around. I'm not bothering anybody. I'm not annoying anybody, because I think we've all had that experience where you're hiking, you're trying to take a picture, you're just trying to enjoy the moment. And here's this drone buzzing over your head or buzzing back and forth. And it's just like, would you please stop?
Although they're kind of like birds for me too. I'm like trying to identify them from the sound. Like, oh, that sounds like a. Wonder
Yeah.
what that one is. Where's that?
Yeah. What is
Is it an
that? Where's it
arrow? Is it a
going?
bee? What kind is that?
Yeah. Yeah. But, you know, all good advice, great discussion. Really appreciate you jumping on the episode here and having this discussion and kind of laying the framework for aerial photography and getting involved with doing landscape photography with the drone, aerial landscape photography. One final question before we close everything out. What has flying taught you about photography, creativity, or even just yourself?
I think really that there is always kind of something new out there to discover. So, when you feel like maybe I've kind of done what I can do with a certain instrument, there's other ways to come at something and other things you can do, other angles. And I think just to be open to try something a little bit different and see if it opens up something for you. I certainly think for me that the aerial photography has definitely done that. Like I was enjoying photography before, but it's added that extra level of excitement and really got me. So I'm like, always like, oh, I wonder what I go out and get today, or what I can find. So just adds that level of interest. And uh, who knows, maybe it'll be satellite photography next or something that people do, and we'll
That'd be a trip.
fly around little Starlinks or something that we'll all take photos from. But yeah, there's always something out there that you can do. So
Yeah, that's very well said.
this podcast is really great, Nick. I really neat that you're doing this and kind of focusing on the Midwest and kind of giving the good old flyover country here little bit of a voice that it doesn't always have. I think it sort of I know there's lots of photographers around the area, but I still feel like it kind of gets ignored for places like Utah and all the big national park states. So
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean that's really what the podcast is all about, is giving the Great Lakes and the Midwest a voice, and just collaborating and helping photographers in the area.
and you've introduced me to some people too from the area that I just didn't know were out there. So I've started following people um, from listening to your show and your photography as well. I mean, I appreciate your enthusiasm for the Great Lakes area and kind of what you do. I mean, you take amazing photos. I really So you are also a discovery for me in the that's come out of the podcast. So
Well, thank you. I definitely appreciate that, and you as well. Your work is awesome, and I love the aerial piece, and that you really showcase Marquette in a really unique way with your work, and it's beautiful. And people that are interested in seeing your work and following along with your journey, how can they connect with you and follow your journey?
I am fairly limited in my location. I mean, you can find me on Instagram is where I put most of my stuff. I've kind of cut back on a lot of social media stuff. So I've got my Instagram. Uh, my handle on there is Bucky Calloway, BuckyCalloway, and I post stuff there pretty regularly. I mean, a few times a week at least. So um, I'm kind of always out shooting and throwing more stuff on my feed.
Yeah, I'll include links to all of Cameron's work in the show notes so that you guys can go and check it out. Give him a follow. Check out some of his aerial landscapes. Awesome work. Absolutely beautiful. But again, I want to say thank you, Cameron, for jumping on and having this conversation and this discussion. It's been great.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been great talking to you.
Another huge thank you to Cameron for joining us. Great discussion, excellent advice. All of his links are in the show notes. If you have not done so yet, please make sure to check out his page and give him a follow. In the next episode, we are exploring Where the Wild Things Roam with Craig Sturkin as we discuss wildlife photography in the Great Lakes. Make sure you are subscribed and following along. Don't forget to rate the show, and I will see you guys on the next one. Take care, everybody.